Russia's darkest secrets were about to be buried in the dark waters of the Mediterranean, thousands of kilometers away from the front lines. A man hiding behind an ordinary sailor's uniform believed he possessed the world's most flawless camouflage, but he was gravely mistaken. Ukraine had taken its strategy to corner Putin from the narrow waters of the Black Sea and transported it 2,700 kilometers for Moscow. 200 elite Ukrainian officers, quietly stationed at 3 different points in Libya, meticulously wove the boldest asymmetric network modern military history has ever seen. The picture before us was not a simple naval operation or a port blockade. On the target list was Andrei Averyanov. Putin's military intelligence had already cornered its prey. Averyanov was completely unaware of all this, and he believed himself to be safe, far removed from the chaos of war, trapped between the steel walls of a massive oil tanker. But there was a deadly detail the general didn't know, and perhaps hadn't even considered. Averyanov would be forced to face a Ukrainian drone, talking about a multi-layered, massive geostrategic encirclement targeting Russia's energy revenues, its network of influence in Africa, and its last footholds in the Mediterranean, all at once. It resulted in a heavy toll on Russian ships and directly on the Kremlin's military hierarchy. Russia's supposedly unbreakable oil bridge in the Mediterranean was shaken to its foundations. Moreover, they did not stop at inflicting merely commercial damage. Through 2 critical attacks occurring in quick succession in Mediterranean waters, simultaneously paralyzed both Russia's energy artery to RFI sources. This is exactly what is happening on the ground. Everything came to light with the explosive investigative reports published by the French public broadcaster. Target was the Russian oil tanker Kendal, which was sailing quietly along the Greece-Libya route. From the outside, this ship looked like just another ordinary, old, and rusty part of that infamous shadow fleet Russia had set up to circumvent Western sanctions. But on that dark night, the cargo the ship was carrying was far more dangerous, far more secret, and far more vital to the Kremlin than barrels of oil. To an exclusive investigation by RFI based on intelligence sources in Libya, who requested anonymity, the tanker's cargo was none other than a target of Ukraine itself. General Andrei Averyanov, one of the top officials of Russia's military agency, the GRU. Averyanov was no ordinary name whispered in the corridors of Moscow. He was the former commander of Unit 29155, the legendary covert unit responsible for the GRU's bloodiest sabotage, assassination, and destabilization operations abroad. From the infamous Skripal poisoning that shook the world in the UK, to the ammunition depot explosions in Bulgaria, and the audacious coup attempt in Montenegro, the list is extensive. The Russian intelligence general was known as the de facto mastermind behind countless shadowy operations that rattled Europe. In recent times, Averyanov's status had risen even further. He had been appointed the top executive in charge of operations for the Africa Corps, which emerged from the ashes of the former Wagner Group. And he had begun to play an active, shadowy role on the Libyan stage. This elite general was traveling in the guise of a simple sailor to avoid detection by Western intelligence and to move quietly through the waters of the Mediterranean. According to RFI, the general was not alone on that ship. There were approximately 10 high-ranking Russian intelligence officers with him, believed to be coordinating the operations. However, Ukrainian military intelligence had already deciphered this seemingly flawless and seamless concealment plan and locked onto its target. A drone launched from a secret Ukrainian base in Misrata struck the tanker with a fatal hit, approximately 250 kilometers off the Libyan coast. The attack was so intense and precise that the massive tanker was rendered inoperable. RFI's field sources reported that 2 people were killed and 7 seriously injured in this flawless assassination operation. However, the most shocking claim, whispered by Libyan sources and causing an earthquake in diplomatic corridors, was that one of those eliminated was none other than General Andrei Averyanov himself. This was not only the first attack in history targeting a shadow fleet tanker in the Mediterranean waters, but also an asymmetric operation that struck directly at the heart of Putin's top intelligence network. Immediately following the attack, on April 3rd to 4th, 2026, the Russian embassy in Libya was forced to issue an official denial, claiming the general was alive. However, RFI immediately updated its report on its website under the headline, "Debunking the Denial," adding this information to its story. Russia's frantic and unprecedented diplomatic denial was interpreted by international observers as a major cover-up effort and a move to hide the shame of the failure. Moreover, even as the shockwaves from this historic assassination attempt and that first heavy blow to the Shadow Fleet had not yet subsided, Ukraine did not stop and pressed the button for a second, far more destructive move. Once again, RFI's detailed reports have uncovered not only this attack, which took place in December, and whose details are emerging today, but also a different operation. Between March 3rd and 4th, Ukraine launched a second attack in the Mediterranean. This time, the target was not intelligence agents, but the massive Russian LNG tanker Arctic Metagaz, en route from Murmansk to Egypt's Port Said, which directly funds the Russian war machine. Carrying a full 61,000 tons of liquefied natural gas, this floating potential bomb was squarely in the crosshairs of Ukraine's state-of-the-art targeting system. Launched from the Melita base near Zawiya, Ukraine's deadly maritime Spectre, the Magura V-5 unmanned surface vessel, targeted the tanker's vital engine room directly. In the moment of the massive explosion, the massive vessel's hull split open. The tanker began taking on water rapidly, a fierce fire erupted, and the ship's propulsion system was completely disabled. The crew was rescued at the last moment, but the massive tanker, engulfed in flames, drifted uncontrollably for hours in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, between Libya and Malta. All these successive attacks were the clearest indication that, following the Black Sea, the Mediterranean has also ceased to be a safe backyard for Russia, and has instead turned into a bloody hunting ground. So, how did Ukraine, which is fighting a war of survival in the Black Sea, come to be capable of conducting such complex, high-profile, and strategic operations in the Mediterranean, thousands of kilometers away? United 24 shed light on this mystery by bringing an agreement signed behind closed diplomatic doors to the global agenda in early April. In October 2025, a historic agreement was reached between the Ukrainian state and the Tripoli-based government of Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dbeibeh that would influence the course of the war. Ukraine's highly capable military attaché in Algeria, General Andriy Bayuk, personally conducted these secret and risky negotiations with the Tripoli government under strict confidentiality. According to news sources, under this agreement, Libya would provide Ukraine with strategic bases on its sovereign territory to launch attacks against Russian ships and targets. In return, the Kiev administration would provide elite training to Libyan soldiers on the use of drones, the backbone of modern warfare. And in the long term, critical arms sales would be carried out, and significant investments would be made in Libya's struggling post-war oil sector. This was a perfectly crafted win-win formula for both sides at the diplomatic table. The Dbeibeh government would add modern drone technology, capable of changing the rules of the game, to its arsenal, countering the anti-Russian power balance backed by Khalifa Haftar, who controls the country's east. Ukraine, meanwhile, would gain an invaluable forward base to strike at Russia's Mediterranean energy corridor, through which Russia bypasses Europe to access the world, and its logistical arteries extending into Africa. The agreement was put into action before the ink had even dried, and as confirmed by RFI, over 200 elite Ukrainian officers, intelligence agents, and military experts were quietly deployed to the western Libyan coast. This covert deployment served as the first and most significant signal, granting Ukraine the ability to directly target Russian oil tankers off the Libyan coast. For, as even a glance at the map reveals, Kiev had secured an incredible geostrategic advantage. Libya stretches like a massive wall along the southern coast of the Mediterranean. A massive Russian LNG tanker departing from the icy waters of the north, from Murmansk, must pass right off the coast of Libya, through this new danger zone, whether it wants to or not, as it heads toward Egypt. Similarly, a fully loaded oil tanker setting sail from Novorossiysk in the Black Sea is bound for the warm waters of India, and its fate again depends on navigating these waters. In other words, Ukraine has secured a perfectly positioned forward operational base from which it can reach these massive Russian tankers, thousands of kilometers away from its own safe waters in the Black Sea, and set an ambush for them. And war-torn, fragmented Libya has become that deadly base on this strategic chessboard. According to RFI's in-depth investigations, as mentioned at the outset, there are exactly 3 main operational points here, where Ukrainian officers and experts are meticulously stationed. And each one performs a completely different, deadly function. The first and most critical from an intelligence perspective is the Misrata Air Force Academy. According to RFI reports, Ukrainian personnel are not alone here. They literally share the same base and the same corridors with Turkish, Italian, U.S. Africa Command, and experienced British intelligence personnel. Positioning itself side by side with NATO-aligned and Western Alliance integrated forces on the ground may have provided the Kiev administration with indirect, yet extremely powerful intelligence and logistical support, including data from military satellites. Data such as the exact location of a Russian ship in the vast waters of the Mediterranean, which fake identifier it is using in AIS systems, and where it is heading. All of this can be processed at this base within seconds and turned into operational orders. The second and key base in Libya hosting Ukrainian military personnel is Zawiya. And this is no ordinary makeshift military base. It is Ukraine's direct Mediterranean arsenal, a fully equipped air and sea drone launch facility. In October and November 2025, under the supervision of Ukrainian engineers, the old runways in this area were completely renovated, high-range communication antennas were installed, and fortification work to protect the drones was rapidly completed. This isolated base, opening directly onto the blue waters of the Mediterranean, has become the main launch pad and heart of the deadly Magura V-5 naval drones that struck Kendil and Arctic Metagaz. The third base area is the headquarters of the 111th Brigade, located on the road to Tripoli International Airport, serving as a meeting point for political and military leadership. It is believed that senior Ukrainian officers and Libyan Ministry of Defense officials are conducting secret coordination meetings here to discuss attack plans, logistical transfers, and partnership strategies. When we look at the whole picture, the reality is this. Bases in the Mediterranean were operationally ready for Ukraine, personnel were on standby, and all that remained was to pull the trigger. And Ukraine confidently brought that famous, flawless weapon, which had become the Russian Navy's worst nightmare in the Black Sea, sinking frigates in seconds, to the Mediterranean arena. Here is the pinnacle of asymmetric warfare, the Magura V-5. This unmanned surface vessel is not merely a weapon, it has become a symbol of 21st century modern asymmetric naval warfare and the supremacy of intelligence over brute force. The Magura features a jet-black carbon fiber hull just 5.5 meters long, rising only half a meter above the waterline, designed to blend into the ocean waves. This aerodynamic low-profile silhouette ensures the vessel is virtually invisible on massive Russian radar screens, and by the time it is detected, it is already too late. Moreover, Magura's operational range is staggering, exceeding a full 800 kilometers. This massive range means the drone can single-handedly control that vast and vital transit corridor stretching from the Libyan coast to the waters off Malta, and even as far south as Italy. Capable of carrying a high-tech penetrating explosive weighing a full 300 kilograms in its nose section, the unit cost of this autonomous maritime drone is a figure that could be called laughable by wartime economic standards. Just $250,000 to $300,000. In contrast, the Russian oil tankers or naval vessels that Magura targets, and often takes out with a single strike, are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The cargoes they carry, meanwhile, are strategic assets worth billions of dollars. Moreover, what makes the Magura V-5 so dangerous is that it is not merely a kamikaze weapon moving in a straight line. It features Starlink-supported multi-channel communication, AI-powered autonomous navigation algorithms, and high-resolution thermal camera systems. With these capabilities, the Magura moves like a ghost among the waves, updating its course in real time, even during pitch-black night operations. This technological marvel has permanently disrupted Russia's peace in the Mediterranean, and the message has echoed through capitals worldwide. After the Black Sea, the Mediterranean is no longer a safe haven for Russian ships. Russia's diplomatic response to these operations was, as expected, harsh. It condemned the attacks, directly accused Ukraine of terrorism, and issued threats. However, the bitter truth behind these angry statements was this. Moscow could practically do very, very little on the ground at sea, because, as a result of the massive attrition caused by the war, Russia no longer has a naval force capable of protecting these massive tankers from attacks or escorting them in the Mediterranean. It is precisely at this point that we reach the most dramatic and critically disruptive layer of the story, one that upends geopolitical balances. That is, the near total loss of Russia's military presence in the Mediterranean, the very heart of its dream of reaching the warm seas at a humiliatingly rapid pace. This massive strategic loss did not unfold over decades of gradual decline. Rather, it occurred almost overnight, like a domino effect collapse. Now is the time to look at the weakest and most fragile link in this collapsing strategic bridge. That is, Russia's near total loss of its military presence in the Mediterranean. This loss was not a collapse that happened overnight. When the Assad regime fell in December 2024, Moscow's massive military infrastructure in Syria collapsed. Russia, which once had approximately 21 main bases and 93 military outposts across the country, suddenly found itself facing the risk of losing everything in the Mediterranean. Personnel were evacuated, equipment was withdrawn or shifted to Libya. It is claimed that only two facilities remain: the Khmeimim Air Base near Latakia and the Tartus Naval Base. Of the dozens of bases, only two remain, and these will be converted for the training of the Syrian army. The Tartus Naval Base was Russia's only fully operational naval facility in the Mediterranean. It is now largely evacuated, ships have been withdrawn, and the Syrian government has cancelled the port management contract. At Khmeimim, only a limited number of personnel and a few cargo planes remain. Russia also fully withdrew from the Qamishli airport in the northeast in January 2026. In other words, Russia has effectively lost its naval logistics in the Mediterranean. In short, Ukraine has seriously shaken Russia's presence in the Mediterranean. The targeting of one of the Kremlin's top generals in this region, along with the alleged attacks by Ukraine that struck two tankers off the coast of Libya, have resulted in a loss of prestige for Putin. Distance no longer matters. As we've seen, Ukraine can target Putin's military and energy resources not only on its own territory or within Russia's borders, but even in the Mediterranean. What are your thoughts on this? Over time, could Ukraine expand this strategy further and put Putin in a difficult position in very different regions? We look forward to your comments. Presented by TGN. Thank you for choosing us.